This secret U.S. military footage shows a large, sleek military airplane flying low over an aircraft carrier. It then diverts and seemingly disappears into the sunny haze at the horizon. But then the same airplane returns, and this time flies even lower, appearing to slow down as it does so. It looks like it's almost parallel to the deck of the aircraft carrier as it passes. That's how low and slow it's flying. A red star can be seen on the jet's tail, revealing that it's a Russian plane. The video pauses at the 27-second mark, perhaps to denote the moment things went amiss. The plane banks up and briefly disappears back into the haze, this time in the opposite direction. It returns into view, now flying in the horizon perpendicular to the aircraft carrier. The video cuts to sailors and airmen now on the deck of the carrier, clearly engrossed in what's going on out at sea. In the distance, a plume of thick, dark smoke can be seen. The footage was recorded on May 25, 1968, and the low-flying aircraft, a Soviet Badger F, had the U.S. Navy carrier the USS Essex as its reconnaissance target in the Norwegian Sea. The Soviet aircraft was piloted by Colonel Andrei Pliev. In the video, you can almost see a glimpse of him in the cockpit as he makes his final and more proximate pass over the American carrier at a height of less than 50 feet. At that moment, the video pauses temporarily, perhaps being assessed as a crucial point that something went wrong before Pliev's plane stalled and crashed into the sea. Copies of the footage provided for an investigation were allegedly considered so sensitive that they were destroyed in the USSR. According to some video sources, the original tape was only shown in Russia after being rediscovered in the U.S. National Archives in 2008. These provocative and potentially very dangerous passes were commonly carried out by both sides during the Cold War, particularly in the mid to late 60s. The purpose of these close proximity passes was typically to make a show of force. Even though the goal was to intimidate, the flybys were usually harmless and relatively uneventful. It could be seen as rather reckless of any pilot to engage in this type of brinkmanship, but it was a way for competing militants to give a sort of middle finger in the air. This particular incident in 1968 happened just 6 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the very brink of World War III. Enmity between the two superpowers was still the main military consideration of both nations at the time. If this Soviet aircraft had crashed into the USS Essex that day in May, the consequences may have been devastating. Even an unintentional crash or accident, such as having any material accidentally ejected onto a U.S. aircraft carrier, would have almost certainly led to armed conflict. These dangerous, macho sideshows were so prevalent and presented such a risk of escalation that they led to the signing of the Incidents at Sea Agreement, or the INCSEA Agreement, between the U.S. and USSR. Formally signed in Moscow in March of 1972 by the U.S. Secretary of the Navy John Warner and his counterpart, the Soviet Admiral Sergei Gorshkov. The agreement stipulated rules by which to manage these incidents, such as physical distance between ships, using signals when maneuvering near one another, letting ships know when a submarine was approaching them, avoiding breaking the military formations of vehicles, using a set of steps to reduce the likelihood of collision, and banning simulated attacks, dropping objects on the other, or illuminating the other's ship bridges. There was a deliberate attempt by the Soviet Union, helped by these flybys, to portray American aircraft carriers as sitting ducks that could be attacked from the air or even by smaller warships. Pentagon studies have disproved this myth of helplessness, however, as a number of defenses could, in theory, easily intercept threatening aircraft before they got anywhere near a carrier group. As a last resort, modern carriers are even equipped with 20mm Gatling guns that shoot 50 rounds per second, should a threat get too close. Yet even after this 1968 event, flybys by the Soviets escalated in the 1970s and into the early 1980s. mostly because the Soviet Union objected to the presence of the US's Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. The Russians often did these flybys in pairs. One aircraft would fly at about 100 feet off the deck, whilst the other would fly overhead, taking photos. There were also aerial matches of chicken between the Soviet and American Navy jets, which often occurred after one of these flybys by either side, in addition to already risky behavior. Fortunately, these mid-air matches tended to be respectful and sometimes included mild pranks. In one incident, a US pilot displayed the latest Playboy Playmate of the Month whilst flying close to a Soviet pilot. On another occasion, a Soviet pilot saluted his American counterpart, holding up what appeared to be a bottle of vodka.